This video looks at the IGCSE reading paper, and we're looking at question 1, and in particular I just want to focus on this third bullet point. What advice would you give to people regarding the day out? You'll notice the word limit is 250 to 350 words, so this bullet point should be around about 100 words of your writing. And it's going to have at least 5 points in it, because in total there will be 15 points that could be made for a full mark answer, covering all 3 bullet points. Okay, here's the mark scheme, and you'll notice that there are 7 bullet points here. You wouldn't need all of them to get a full mark answer. And I'm going to refer you to typical examiner's advice here. This is the most difficult bullet point because you have to give your opinions and predictions, and what makes that difficult is that you have to infer. You have to work things out from the text, and this they call the discriminator. In other words, it's going to discriminate between grades. You can get lots of points on the first 2 bullet points, but if you don't get them here, you're not going to get probably a B, and definitely not an A or an A star. So there are a couple of things I'm going to focus on in this video, and one is this idea of what developed ideas are, so the difference between just finding a point and writing it down and developing that point. And just to remind you that all 3 bullet points are needed to be well covered in order to get into the top band, and that's why this video is about the third bullet point, the one that's most difficult. I'm assuming that you'll find the other 2 much easier. Right, there are also 5 marks available here, and that's for your structure, your paragraphing, and your language. And I've just underlined in the top band the number of times language appears here. So your choice of vocabulary is going to count twice within this band. You know, there's not a lot in here, and because vocabulary counts twice, that's really going to be something for you to concentrate on, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. Here's my model answer, which is around about 100 words, just under. And I just want to point out, without going through it in loads of detail, 2 things that I do that really helps me with an exam. And the first is I focus on good verbs. Verbs stop me waffling. They tell me exactly what somebody should do. So you'll see that I've got 20 verbs here. At least a fifth of my words are therefore verbs. That's an awful lot. Verbs pack an enormous amount of information, and therefore they help you say a lot under exam pressure. And they also help you say a lot succinctly, and succinctly means with as few words as possible. That obviously saves you time in an exam, but also makes you sound like an expert, and that's what's going to get you really high grades. And then another thing that I've done is highlighted the adjectives in blue, and these are also packed with information, which mean I don't have to write long sentences to explain how to get the marks. And I shall probably go through this answer in a separate video, but that's just to show you the skills that I'm trying to use when I write in order to hit the top grades. Okay, I'm now going to show you 11 responses from my students. We had a look at this today, and I gave them only 5 minutes to find the information for the bullet point, and only 5 minutes to write. And that's far quicker than you'd have to write in the exam. It's probably double the speed. However, writing under pressure like this has revealed quite a few errors that most of you will be making, I suspect. So this is going to be really useful if you can stick with it. Now, in this part of the reading paper, spelling isn't tested, so I'm not correcting any spellings here, but I'm just going to point a few things out to you. If you're thinking of visiting Winter Wonderland at the heart of London, then you are going to need to know a few things. Well, that's all introduction, isn't it? It's not getting you any marks. The first bit of advice given is don't worry. And that's where the answer starts. The rest is just waffle that's taking you time, and you don't want to lose time in an exam. You'll notice that the candidate is doing well though, starting each sentence with the verb, just as I did, and that's going to help the rest of the answer, I hope, be succinct. Here again is another introduction. There are a lot of things I'm very happy I did before going on the outing, but also some I wished I did beforehand. For example, none of this earns you any marks because it's not giving any advice at all, and it's making the other mistake of introducing I. We don't need to know what you did when you were there, we just need the advice that you're inferring from having read that article. So here you start to earn marks starting with a verb look, booking online. We don't need to know that we did book for the big wheel. What you'd want to say is booking for the big wheel costs £20 when pre-booking, but it is worth it. So you can see how doing that reduces the number of words you use and allows you to hit that 350 word limit, and also allows you to make all those points in the exam. Here we see what feels like a very good candidate, but again you'll notice all this is introduction. It doesn't actually score any marks at all. Then there is a clumsy bit here. The journey there and back can almost be completely opposite depending on how you travel there. Well, that's true, but that's only describing what the experience is, and it's not giving any advice at all, so that still doesn't get any marks. Now, however, this is all advice. Trains can be delayed or extremely busy, so may not be the best option if on a tight time schedule. Buses are less crowded and take you right to the venue. There's no need to worry about getting lost. Perfect. If you want to avoid disappointment, I suggest booking some things you would like to do, such as the big wheel, which is £20 when you pre-book. Now, all of this is very well written advice and starts to score marks, but you can see that nearly half the answer doesn't get anything. This one I'll read to you and see if you can spot where it starts earning marks. Winter Wonderland is a wonderful experience for all. However, sometimes the journey there can be less than ideal. For example, if you are considering the train, ensure you catch an early one to avoid rush hour. Okay, how did you do? Everything in the box here is all introduction, no advice, and therefore gets no marks. Now, however, you can see how the answer really kicks off. I've underlined in red all the verbs that this writer has used, and each verb is kind of making a new point in detail, and that's the second part of what I wanted to teach you. The more verbs you put in, the more detail you add to your answer, and if you remember, it was detail that was going to get you into the top grade. Let's read this bit because it's where most verbs are packed, and therefore that's a clue to you that this is the best written. If you are considering the train, ensure you catch an early one to avoid rush hour. An alternative is to ride the bus to the venue. These verbs have helped the writer to give extra information. They're telling us reasons why the train is a bad idea and why the bus is a good idea. That's the extra detail that's getting you the grades, and he or she has done that by putting in the verbs. That's what's doing it. There are some things to look for whilst visiting Winter Wonderland. Here we've only got one sentence that's wasted. Now we get straight to the advice. I recommend you do not get the train, however get the bus which takes you all the way there. Now to get the detail you need some description of the train being overcrowded, and like you've got the detail for the bus here, the advantage is it gets you all the way there. However, this writer has realised that and put the information about the overcrowding in the next sentence, so the full mark is earned here. Also pre-book the big wheel so you don't wait for hours to get one ride, so that's one point about it. And then here's the extra detail. It's only £20 when you do. That means when you do pre-book. So that's a fully explained point and is earning the marks. It's got lots of detail. When I went there, I forgot my bag with all our food in. That's now storytelling, and it's not advice. We don't need it. Don't put yourself into the advice. Here, massive mistake is direct quotation from the text, and you know this has to be in your own words. Don't do it. Remember to take one. So now we've got advice again. That refers back to the bag because the cost of food is ridiculously expensive. And here we've got the adjective, ridiculously expensive, which gives us a really good reason to take your own food. So the marks are now again started to be earned. Right, I should pause here and say that I chose examples because of the number of points that students were making, and I've put them in point order, and you can see that from the number of ticks. But as I'm reviewing them, I'm quite surprised that every candidate is putting in some sort of introduction that's not needed, just like here. Now let's get to the advice. Remember lunch for your family, as the food there is overpriced and only of a decent standard. So 2 reasons. That's a developed, detailed point, isn't it? Also, recommend to people visiting pre-book. So that's a bit clumsy, but I recommend that you pre-book, as it can give you money on rides, and that should be money off rides. But then the extra detail gives you the mark. It gives you the ability to avoid queues. So that's a detailed point, as is this one. Next, it would be beneficial, especially if you have a family with young children, to go by bus to Winter Wonderland and avoid the train tube, as it is very crowded. You'd want to put words in there, the train and the tube. You don't want anything that looks like slang. But you can see there are 4 well-developed points here. Here we have a candidate who's making 5 points, you can see by the number of ticks, but there are some problems. Bring plenty of money to Winter Wonderland, for the children love rides, especially the big wheel. So we now know the big wheel's expensive, but there's no advice here to pre-book to get a discount or to avoid queues. Therefore, this isn't a developed point. However, you are going to need the money to pay for the enormous prices of the food. That is reasonably developed there then. It was like paying for a house. That's descriptive writing, it's not advice, and it was is telling them about your visit, which you don't need to do. Later that night, again, is telling them about your visit, which you don't need to do. It got very chilly, so here's the advice. I would wear plenty of layers to stop the frosty night, and that actually tells you everything that was in this bit anyway. I would catch the bus too, the train is packed. So that's a slightly developed point there. The extra detail would be that the bus takes you right to the venue. And also pre-book the big wheel, fine, but that's not developed yet because you haven't said that there's a discount or that this avoids queues. So this is a candidate whose reading is excellent. They've come up with lots of facts. They only need 5 in this bullet point to get the 5 marks, really. However, hardly any of the points are being developed, and therefore you're not going to get into the top bands. Okay, here we have a piece with no introduction. It gets straight into the advice. I would avoid taking the train when there is a bus which takes you directly there. It doesn't mention the overcrowding. On your visit, it would be recommended that you take yourself some packed lunch to avoid the expensive cost of Christmas-style turkey sandwiches. That's quite developed, but this is too specific because that's just what the person in the article chose to eat, but she also made it clear there was a lot of other stuff to choose from. Before going, I would advise you to pre-book, which will avoid the enormous queues, excellent, that we had to face, which you don't need to add in. This also means you will get more done, including the big wheel, good, the circus, the ice rink, and seeing Father Christmas in his grotto. That's a really developed point because you've given all the other attractions. But again, although there are 5 points, they're not all developed, so they're not going to get into the highest band. Next, we have a writer who is managing quite a lot of detail in each of their 5 points. However, there's that short introduction again that we don't need. The advice starts here. Firstly, there's a bus straight to the venue. This is better than getting on the packed train. And the word packed gives us the reason why the bus is a better idea. And we go straight to the venue as well. Very succinct, but that's a developed point because it gives you 2 reasons to take the bus instead of the train. When going to activities like the big wheel, pre-book as it's £20. The writer has forgotten to tell us that that's cheaper than if you don't pre-book. Also, other activities like the circus and the ice rink would be better to book in advance to miss the long queues. That's a developed idea because it's more than one activity and there's a really solid reason for doing it. Also bear in mind the expensive prices for eating lunch and getting drinks. So you can see how this is much better than just referring to the turkey sandwiches like the last one. The fully developed answer, of course, would tell them to take a packed lunch as well to avoid that cost. The last thing to keep in mind is by 6 p.m. it's extremely cold, so wearing layers would be recommended. That is a developed point because there's the point from the passage and there's the advice that goes to tell you why it would be a good idea. Here you can see a writer who has carefully split their ideas into paragraphs, which makes it much easier for the examiner to read, and there's hardly any introduction at all, just a few words. On your day out, I would advise taking the bus straight to the venue as the train is extremely crammed. During the day, refreshments will be required, so taking a bag of refreshments will prevent you having to pay the expensive price for a sandwich and a drink. 2 very well developed points. Furthermore, in Winter Wonderland lies an ice rink. By pre-booking, queuing will be avoided. That's excellent use of the passive there, meaning more time for other things. Along with the ice rink, booking the big wheel beforehand means it will cost £20, and that's implying that that's cheaper. Last of all, taking lots of layers, more than usual, will stop the night air freezing you. So here, every single point that's been made has been developed, and there are 5 of them. So this candidate has done extremely well. Here we have a candidate who's made 6 points, but do they score as highly? Let's have a look. Well, first we've got an introductory sentence which we could get rid of. Then let's read. The trains never come on time. No, that's not necessarily advice, is it? It would be best catching the bus. Okay, now it's starting to make sense if the writer had written because the trains are often late. It takes you straight to where you want to get to with no fuss, that's good. The big wheel is a big highlight of the day. Yes, but why? You haven't said. However, it's best if you pre-book tickets so you don't have to queue. Good. Plus, it's only cost you £20, so that's a really developed point now. Don't forget to bring food along with you, as the refreshments are a rip-off. That is colloquial language, but you probably get away with it in a blog. So that is a developed point. Finally, if you were thinking about going to the circus or the ice rink, I'd advise you to pre-book again, as it's a nightmare to queue, and that's another developed point. But not as many developed points as the previous answer. And you'll notice that they haven't entered into the examiner's head with paragraphs. The previous answer got into the examiner's head and said, hey, look at this. This is a writer who knows what they're doing. Even before I read it, it just looked great because I could see there were going to be lots of different points. They were paragraphed. And finally, here's another 6 tick. Let's see how this writer has done. They've started very well with no introduction whatsoever. Don't go by train because you'll be packed on the train. Instead, use the bus provided. That's quite developed. It doesn't say why the bus is better. Ride the big wheel. It has a view of all of London. Good. That's starting to be developed now as to why the big wheel is good. And if you pre-book, it's only £20. Good. That shows that it's cheaper to pre-book. That's now a developed answer. Take some food with you because it will cost a lot of money to buy food. Okay, so that's reasonably developed. That should be then. Then skate on their skate rink. It's amazing. And pre-book it. Then there's some words missing, which is less hassle on the day. Will save you time. Okay, but it doesn't tell you why. That detail about the queuing, so that's not developed yet. Take lots of clothes because it might get cold. To develop this, you'd want to suggest that it gets colder later in the evening. So you can see a couple of points developed, but the others aren't, so it's not getting into the top band, even though this reader has found everything they need in the text. So let's summarise. Don't write an introduction because you have to advise, and get straight to the advice. All the information is packed in the verbs that you use, and the more verbs you use, the more detail you're giving. So you want several verbs for each point that you're making. Paragraph, because that signals to the examiner straight away that you're making lots of points, which tells the examiner that you've got lots of detail, which makes them want to give you a higher mark. And then finally, I showed you how important the vocabulary was. That was linked to adjectives, which I haven't covered fully here, but is very much linked to your verbs. So focusing on the verbs will give you the better vocabulary, which will give you the higher marks. Well done for watching the video. I hope you found it really useful.